Turn and on the second.
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Policy Board meeting, our first one of 2023 for the Regional Transportation Planning Organization. We will start, like we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flag is in the northwest corner.
Right over there.
I just figured I'd like to say that and see where people start looking.
It's not right.
To the republic which stands. It's actually the northeast.
And the flag should be, the state flag needs to be to the right of it.
We'll get that fixed. All right. Again, welcome, everyone. We do have a longer, couple of long items on the agenda, so we'll keep moving along. So I don't have anything other to say than welcome, and glad you all are here. Glad we're gathered, and we have some people online as well. And Ms. Firestone, if you would do the roll call so we can dive right in.
Yes, sir. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges,
Here.
Ms. Barnhart. Charles City County, Mr. Atkins,
Present.
Mr. Coda. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll,
Honored to be here.
Mr. Holland,
Here.
Mr. Winslow, Mr. Miller. Richland County, Chair Lumpkin,
Here.
Ms. LaFollette,
Here.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson,
Here.
Mr. Davis, Ms. Pritchard. Henrico County, Ms. O'Bannon,
Here.
Mr. Thornton, Mr. Brandon. New Kent County, Ms. Page,
Here,
thank you. Mr. Tiller, Mr. Evelyn. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams,
Here.
Ms. Carmack. City of Richmond, Mr. Addison,
Present.
Ms. Jordan, here. Ms. Lynch. Dr. Newville,
Here.
Mr. Jones, Ms. Nye, Ms. Robertson. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. GRTC, Ms. Adams, here. RMTA, Ms. Dean. VDOT, Mr. Cotton. Mr. Ridlett,
Here.
CPAC, Ms. Guthrie,
here,
thank you, Ms. Erickson. DRPT, Mr. Binsky, here, Mr. Spark. FHWA, Mr. Nelson.
Present.
You, Mr. Rucker. FTA, Mr. Koenig. Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale,
Here.
Ms. Ruffin. And Virginia Department of Aviation, Mr. Harrington. I believe we have Mr. Harrington present virtually, so I will mark them as present. That concludes roll call for attendance, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. And folks are participating remotely, but we don't have to go through our policy because we're back in the policy we adopted because we're in the city of Richmond. All right, is that correct?
Correct, yes, and I have just been notified that there's a little bit of trouble hearing for the people participating on the Zoom, so if everyone would speak towards the meeting out there in the center, that helps with the sound.
Okay, good, thank you. So, diving right in, any amendments? Mr. Parsons, policy board members, any requests to amend or move around the agenda? Edits, comments, seeing none, hearing none, we'll move forward with the agenda as we have it and start out with the meeting minutes approval from our last month's meeting.
Motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Williams and Ms. Jordan. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
Abstention.
A couple of extensions, Mr. Van and Mr. Peterson are two extensions, and any nays? All right, that's passed. We have open public comment period. We did get a written public comment that I'm gonna have Mr. Parsons summarize, but we'll do that right after we make sure. Is there anybody present here that wishes to speak to the policy board? Is there anybody online that has indicated?
Mr. Chairman, may I read the statement?
Since we have no one here, no one online, we'll move to the written statement.
Can I read a statement on the agenda first?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, please.
I'm going to read through the statement on the agenda item, just to lay some ground rules for public comment. This meeting is being held in person and via Zoom. We do have Zoom open. A link to the Zoom webinar where individuals may register to participate is posted at the top of this agenda and has been since COVID started. Members of the public are invited to submit public comments either verbally or in writing. Written comments can be submitted through the Q&A and chat function, which is on Zoom at the bottom of the screen, or to the email address at the top of the agenda. Written comments will be read aloud or summarized during the meeting when possible and will be included in the meeting minutes. Verbal comments can be taken during this period. Please indicate by raising your hand for in-person participants or through the Q&A and chat functions on Zoom for virtual participants if you would like to comment. When acknowledged by the chair, please clearly state your name so that it may be recorded in the meeting minutes. And Mr. Chair, as you mentioned, we had one written comment. I'll go through that. This is a comment from Becky Dale regarding pedestrian safety. And to summarize, the comment is related to working towards engineering safer streets for pedestrians is a task that everyone is trying to do. But the comment is related to pedestrians themselves should not be crossing when it is not safe. They simply cannot assume that drivers see them and will stop in time due to a number of things like distracted drivers, impaired drivers, sun in their eyes, foggy, rainy, dark, etc. There's a visibility problem on roads when a vehicle in the first lane stops for a pedestrian. Pedestrian responsibility, I think, is the overall component of this comment. We should remind pedestrians to cross the traffic lights whenever possible and follow the rules of the road. In your education efforts, please emphasize that we are all responsible for our own safety, and drivers may not necessarily see pedestrians when they're in the way. Again, this is from Becky Dale, and we can certainly enter it in the minutes if we are apt to do, and we can take it further direction with the.
We should put it into the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think in case Ms. Dale is online paying attention to this, should emphasize that all members have gotten the full context of the message, and that we do appreciate your input.
And at the executive committee meeting earlier, we talked about the role of CTAC. This might be something that we could pass along to CTAC, and I would suggest we do that. Communicate this to CTAC. This might be something for them to look at. Ms. O'Bannon.
That's the question. Was there any indication where Ms. Dale lives?
No, ma'am.
No.
Thank you.
So any other, thank you for reading in that explanation, Mr. Parsons. So I'll open it back, or it's still open, but if there's anybody in the room or anybody online. Nobody online. Okay, we'll close the public comment period. Chair report. Nothing other than looking forward to hearing from the city of Richmond. If you want to. I did have pictures when Ashland did a couple of months ago. I had some pictures. I've been trying to make it to the rounds when we have a jurisdiction up and take some photos. You have a Sid, are you able to get us to launched on the highlight part of the. Obviously, Richmond was the obvious pick for this meeting as we're back here in the city in this great location with a beautiful view. All right, so actually, that's up in Churchill. took a selfie with Churchill right after Christmas. I know all the way from Goochland, but it's worth driving from all the way from Goochland.
Which location?
I didn't want to advertise anybody, but Sub Rosa, if you've ever been up to Sub Rosa, across from the Roosevelt Restaurant there in Churchill. And then we, I went with our new county administrator who's from South Carolina, and so we toured all around, went to Hollywood Cemetery. I mean, there's so many things, the Virginia Historical, what's now, I think it's Historical Cultural Historical Society. Belvedere Bridge, we walked along there, and I have more, but we're ready to dive right in and hear from the city on their presentation, just, you know, again, highlighting the city. Mr. Addison.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I'll just quickly later the agenda. First of all, I think our biggest news for 2022 was bringing Plan RVA downtown to Manchester. I think the articles got a lot of press and coverage, and thank you all for joining us. I think the best thing is the backdrop behind me is part of the reason why we're here downtown Richmond. One of the things we want to say is welcome. Glad you're here. I know there were some steps to get the doors open and the furniture in here and the thing built out, but we're glad you're here as a big anchor of downtown. A lot of activities happened in the city over the last couple of years. And the reason why I want to highlight some of the economic development projects is because, as you might have seen in some of the packets we handed out, we had a lot of activity. The first one I want to say is the skyline is going to change in the next couple of years as CoStar is going to build their $460 million new headquarters downtown. They're pretty much going to block the view of the new Dominion Tower from us. So that will be changing in the near future. But more importantly, it's going to start revitalizing our riverfront. And I think that's going to be a big step of our interest of downtown, revitalizing access to our Browns Island and our riverfront Jamesburg Park system, naturally protected river in downtown Richmond, which is rare for cities of our size across the country. And so I think the more we can bring people to that activity, the better. The next announcement is the plans we have underway, not finalized yet, for a new amphitheater down by along the riverfront as well. Really trying to elevate probably 7,500 seats amphitheater and plans for bringing more people and events downtown as well. One of the things we have too is we have activity just north of that in City Center. We're finalizing our plans. We have an RFP out, or RFI out, a request for information. We have 5 developers interested in redeveloping the heart of downtown. We have about 20 city blocks that are city owned or publicly owned in some capacity that are ripe for redevelopment. And included in that is going to be headquarter hotels for the convention center. We're really bringing, I think, an elevated conversation around tourism downtown, because convention centers, I don't know about you, but whenever I go to a conference in other cities and I see their conference centers, they're bustling with people, whether they're at my conference or not. And the hotels are usually 2 or 3 within walking distance of that. And right now, we technically have 2 that are adjacent to that, but they're in need of more seats and more beds. And so we're excited to see that elevated in the conversation. And of course, if you just go west down Lee Street, right behind the convention center, you'll get to the southern border of our biggest project that is finalized and is in process, which we voted on a rezoning update for Tuesday at the Planning Commission, which will come before council on Monday, which is the Diamond District project, $2.4 billion in the heart of our amazing Councilwoman Catherine Jordan's district here. And one of the things we're excited about is just keeping the flying squirrels here. I know how important they are for a lot of our families here around the region. They're such a great event to go to with kids, and it's always so amazing to see what they do in terms of engaging our community. So keeping them here for the long term is going to be a great priority. And just adjacent to that, VCU is going to be building their athletic village, which we don't have all the final details on value, impact, or access points for that piece, but it's going to be an incredible anchor in terms of really revitalizing investment downtown. We have more opportunities, I think, coming throughout the next couple years, but hopefully in the next couple months. The reason why it's important for this committee is people need to get there. And transportation is not just in cars. It's gonna be how people park and walk and ride the bus and can safely get to and from, in and out of all of these areas downtown, because it's not just for the city of Richmond, this is for our entire region to enjoy. And while we have, I think, seen great investment with Pulse, I think we've seen a lot of success in Pulse and committed to continuing that message. I think it's now looking at how do we connect all these access points together? Because for me, what I see with these exciting opportunities is now, how do we get employees to maybe live in the counties, to work at CoStar downtown, and not need to clog up our highways or park along the streets to try to find ways to get in and out of work? For me, that opportunity creates the area where we can see focusing on main corridors for transit-oriented development. And I think that's where the city can help lead a little bit on how this works across the region, because the more we can start seeing, bringing people to the front, bringing streets and safe sidewalks and complete street design to work, as we're starting to see kind of take shape behind us. Don't mind the big mess behind us, but you get the idea, the building we're in now, I think this is where we can start seeing a lot of change happen. And for me, I'm excited because I'm seeing the city of Richmond with my can-do attitude partners on city council. We are really excited about seeing where we can start leading in terms of showing what we can do as the center, the capital city of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Really put these ideas into play for you, because the more we can get rid of our borders, the more it's just we're the Richmond region and we're doing things together as a team. I feel like the better quality of life we're gonna have for everybody. We all win that capacity. I think transportation is a key part of that. And so that's our presentation. There's a lot more we can go through. You can go through the book if you want to. There's more details, of course, online with our EDA information as well. More to come. We look forward to seeing how we can work together to make transportation the main anchor for how we make development faster. So thank you all.
Thank you.
There are copies out at the kitchen table. If anybody wants more, like Mr. Allen's holding them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. And there's Joy, it's down with district.
That's the big one.
And there's
Yeah.
Joy,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or
down
have-
with district.
Yeah. Good, thank you, thank you all. All right. Where? So the secretary's report. Work status and financial report. Mr. Parsons, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Before we get to the work status and financial report, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping details. Welcome everybody to the new boardroom. This is the first time we've used it, so it is still a work in progress, but we're happy with where we are, and we appreciate all of your support to get us here. We have cameras installed in the ceiling with mics. We are working to get those online, and we expect that to be in place next month. So we'll be able to provide a better experience for those watching and participating remotely. We are going to be adding additional details to the space over the next few months, and we're looking forward to hosting lots of meetings here, not just for Plan RVA and the PPO and CBTA, but we're looking forward to hosting community meetings here, providing a space that's accessible to a lot of different folks. That's part of the reason we came to Manchester. And we're just excited about the opportunity to be here. There is I don't know if this was communicated at the beginning of this meeting, but parking issues. If you did grab a ticket in the garage this morning, we can validate that today. And then we'll be able to provide more detail for next month's meeting and the meetings to follow about the parking arrangements and what you can expect moving forward.
And Janice will validate the parking tickets for you, so don't forget to do that before you leave.
So, Mr. Chair, starting on page 10 of the agenda packet is the work status and financial reports for November. The one thing that I would like to bring to your attention, we are on track for this fiscal year. If you look at the long-range transportation plan budget item, that is showing 87% total funds expended. That is actually what we expected. We are not over committed to that project, but this is basically a segment of planning for the 2050 long-range plan, developing socioeconomic data. And that is a project that we expect to not last all of this fiscal year. We expect to wrap it up very shortly. So we are on track with that item as well. We continue in terms of billing and funds expended. We continue to have staffing needs, and we have advertised a couple different opportunities to join the staff here at Plan RVA, and we continue to hope to add additional folks over the next few months to help us with the important work of not just the TPO, but all the organizations that we serve. So that will help in spending funds towards our grants. And Mr. Chair, that's the snapshot of the financial report. Be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Parsons on that? Are you, on these job openings that have been open for quite a while, are you getting applications?
We are. We are sorting through those and we're actually getting ready to start interviews for one of those positions. So we do have looks like some qualified candidates, but we'll be able to provide more information.
Does that include the planning that when we talked about have some planning staff that can support some of the smaller localities? Is that position, the potential position, is that being?
We are still trying to identify what that role would be and expand the position that is currently open right now as the data analyst.
Okay.
It'll help with all of our programs and be able to provide some good background for a lot of the work we do.
And the planner position, you're still refining that?
Yes, sir.
Refining and defining, okay. When do you expect that to be advertised?
As soon as I'm able.
Chad, do you want to- maybe Mr. Lumpkin, the local support position is a part-time position that was approved for this year, but the board for Plan RVA would have to approve it to convert to full-time. So that would be proposed as part of next fiscal year's budget. So we're working to scope that now, and then that would be part of the proposal in the packet for next fiscal year.
So maybe we're, and I don't know if folks can hear you from there, but the point you said we have a part-time position budgeted. Is it not being advertised yet?
Oh, it's filled.
Oh, it's
The
filled.
part-time position. Since August.
Oh, so we're looking to, for the next fiscal year, we're going to ask Plan RVA to consider funding a full-time position?
Yes, sir. The position that's filled this year is part-time. It's a graduate student position. That was filled in August, and that it was approved as a part-time position this year to pilot the program.
Okay,
The idea that next fiscal year, if it's successful and there's momentum, we would be able to come back and request that get converted to full-time.
is it typical that this policy board has input in, in asking Plan RVA, like this position, we would like to see it in the budget? Is that
Yes, I
a
think
typical
Mr.
role?
Parsons regularly scan the needs of the TPOs. And certainly the crossover membership helps tremendously to make sure that the needs that you have on the transportation planning part are fulfilled by Plan RVA. Absolutely.
Good, okay. Thank you both on that. Any other questions? Next on the agenda? Jump ahead to the work plan. Let me catch up. Are we ready to dive into new business? I'll turn it over to you to make the introductions for our VPRA presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With us today is Colin Birch from the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. I told him that he would be the first presentation, but in the new space, but Mr. Addison jumped in front. First. So we welcome Colin and look forward to working with the VPRA a lot in the future as rail is expanded through our region. We're excited about the opportunity and looking forward to the update from VPRA this morning.
Thank you, Chet, and thank you to the TPO staff and the board for inviting myself here and my colleague, Dominic. I'm Colin Birch, Planning Manager with Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. This presentation, I just want to give you a rundown, kind of bring everybody up to speed in case anyone isn't familiar with us, the history of passenger rail in Virginia, what we do, some of the projects that we're working on right now, particularly in the Richmond area. So, the next slide, please.
The slide from there.
There. So this slide's a little bit busy, and that's kind of the point is it's basically a story of the 10 to 15 year recent history of Commonwealth's investment in passenger rail and rail overall in Virginia. And you can see that in 2006, we started a fund to construct capital projects for rail in Virginia that would benefit both passenger and freight. This is kind of in advance of the 2008 Act, the Passenger Rail Investment Improvement Act of 2008, or PRIA, which, and that was enacted by Congress in 2008, went into effect in 2013. And what that did was it split Amtrak into 3 business lines, essentially. There's the Northeast Corridor, which, if you're familiar, it's the line that goes from DC to Boston, and that's on Amtrak and rail and right of way. It's electrified. It's where you'll find the Acela and some of the more high-speed trains in Amtrak's network. There's the long distance routes, which are those multi-state kind of interstate long distance routes that go from Chicago to New York, typically on freight railroad infrastructure. And then you have the third line, which is state sponsored services.
And those are routes that are less than 750 miles that are operated by Amtrak, but are administered by the states. And there's about 19 states, 21, I think, different organizations that administer these routes. In Virginia currently has 4 routes, and you can see that back in 2006, ahead of this new act by Congress, Virginia kind of got ahead of the game and is still one of the leaders around the country in terms of passenger rail state-sponsored services. And so as Virginia has kind of been slowly investing more and more into passenger rail, it's been a big success and the story of expansion and additional services throughout the Commonwealth. And in 2019, the first of a few agreements was executed between the Commonwealth and the freight railroads to acquire rail and infrastructure. So as I was mentioning earlier, how these long distance services and many of the state services will operate on freight networks. There you'll find a lot of the on-time performance issues because the freight railroads, their infrastructure is not really built out for passenger service. So the speed and the reliability is not as robust as it is on the Northeast corridor or places where the right of way is publicly managed. So in 2019, the General Assembly created the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, which I can go into a little bit more detail on a few slides, but we've been tasked with kind of improving, preserving, and expanding passenger rail in the Commonwealth. And since the pandemic kind of shut down ridership for a number of us, particularly in the RTC, but we've actually had post-pandemic some of the highest ridership we've had ever, and we've kind of been a model for other states around the world. Next slide, please. So this slide is kind of unnecessary. I think all of us are aware of the congestion on the interstates in Virginia and how paving our way out of congestion is not necessarily sustainable and it's kind of cost prohibitive. So as a passenger rail authority, we are looking to expand and increase options for passenger transportation around the Commonwealth. And you can see that there is currently a bit of a bottleneck for expanding passenger rail, and I'll get into that in a little more detail, crossing the Potomac from Virginia into the Northeast. Next slide, please. There are a number of agreements that I mentioned earlier that were executed by the Commonwealth, one with CSX and one with Norfolk Southern. I'll go into detail on those in a little bit. But this map kind of shows the passenger network in Virginia and the right-of-way and track that was purchased by the Commonwealth that will be preserved and used for passenger rail service. Next slide, please. Going back to what VPRA is and our charge, created in 2020 by the General Assembly. A number of us came over from DRPT, the rail division, and we've also reached out around the country, around the world really, to bring in some engineers and experts in the field to help us build out this big piece of infrastructure that we suddenly have on our hands. We own that rail, that right of way, and we're responsible for building it out and improving it. And the bottom bullet above the board's bullet is the points how we will partner with others to operate the passenger service. So Amtrak will be the operator. We will be the administrator and owner of the right of way. Next slide, please. And also, sorry, VRE, Northern Virginia Railway Express is one of our partners who also operated through their consultant or their contractor Keolis. The CSX agreement, which was the first of the 2 agreements executed by the Commonwealth, is in terms of size the larger of the 2, and it is essentially 3 segments in Virginia that were part of the deal. The first is segment 1, which is to purchase the right of way from DC all the way down to Petersburg, half of the right of way, and then ultimately we will build that infrastructure out to one day separate passenger and freight entirely. The segment 2, which is the Doswell to Clifton Forge line, which kind of runs east-west across the state, is currently what was the Buckingham Branch Railroad. The only passenger lines on that is the Cardinal, which goes from Chicago to New York. It passes into Virginia from West Virginia at Clifton Forge and then continues up, kind of paralleling 81, it continues on to New York City. And then segment 3, which is I think I have some of the segments here backwards, but segment 3 down at the bottom, the S line, which connects Petersburg to North Carolina, formerly the Southern line. It's an abandoned right of way that CSX owned, we acquired in the agreement. And we partnered with North Carolina to assess building out that corridor to make a direct connection from Raleigh to the northeast. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And you can see on this slide also, there are a number of improvements on the RRTPO, the Richmond Fredericksburg Potomac Railroad, which is the line that stretches from Richmond to DC. These are phase 1 and 2 improvement projects that are undertaken by VPRA to help build out the infrastructure in the near future. Next slide, please. In addition to purchasing all this right of way and track with CSX, it kind of sets the conditions for us to construct Long Bridge. And if anybody's heard of passenger rail in Virginia in the past 5-10 years, if I heard of Long Bridge, and what it is it's essentially a mega project. It's a huge project of essentially 6 bridges that cross from Virginia into DC, with kind of the crown jewel of this project being the Long Bridge itself with the Potomac River crossing. Currently, there's a 2-track structure that crosses from Virginia into DC. It's at 98% capacity during rush hour, and it has not been upgraded since 1944, I think. So it's in dire need of improvements. The only crossing from the mid-Atlantic into the northeast. I think the next nearest one will be Parkersbury, and it's not up to passenger worthiness. So you can see this slide shows you the Long Bridge, some of the pieces of the Long Bridge project, and then the timeline there at the top. Next slide, please. In terms of what Virginia is getting through these deals and these agreements is additional Amtrak service, and some of that service has already been, you can see it right now, it's already happened. In 2021, we extended the train that used to terminate at Staples Mill down to Richmond Main Street Station. And also this about 6 months ago, we acquired an additional service to Roanoke. So now we have 2 round trip service trains to Roanoke and an additional round trip train to Roanoke. And in this, it's another kind of a big busy slide, but again, that's just underscoring how much more service we're going to be getting over the next 5 to 10 years, where as the construction completes with these projects that are mentioned in the phase 1, phase 2, additional services will be provided. So at the end of 2026, we'll have an additional 2 trains. And then by the end of 2030, which is the end of phase 2, we will have more than double the amount of trains serving Richmond to the Northeast Corridor with roughly hourly service. There'll be a period of obviously at night where travel is not, people aren't traveling in the middle of the night, but during the day and the rush hours, we'll have nearly hourly service from Richmond to DC. And those schedules are still being worked out. So if there's any questions about that, I don't have the answers for. Next slide, please. So these next few slides, I want to talk about the improvements that are going to be done and the projects in the Richmond area. And the first one is some of the projects to extend service from Staples Mill to Richmond Main Street Station. With that first CSX agreement, we secured the rights to extend any train from Staples Mill that originates and terminates at Staples Mill to Richmond Main Street Station. There's some improvements at Staples Mill that are currently planned, and then also a labor facility that is being constructed south of Hackney Yard, which is the big yard between Staples Mill and Main Street Station. The trains have to pass through. They'll be constructed, and what that does is currently the trains that serve Main Street Station in the morning originate and terminate at Main Street Station. After they drop the passengers off at the end of their run, we have to make what's called a deadhead movement back north, up through Hackney Yard to Staples Mill Station, where they'll rest overnight on the pocket track there. In the morning, make another deadhead movement south through Hackney Yard, pick up the passengers at Main Street Station, continue back north. So this is going to eliminate some of the inefficiencies. Next slide, please. So looking further out, some of the projects beyond phase 2, which is 2030, a number of projects around the Richmond area are being considered. One is a planning study to look at improving the west platform at Staples Mill. And if anyone's taking the train from Staples Mill Station, currently the east platform is only accessible to passengers. This study is going to look at improving the west platform so we can connect some services down through Norfolk to Main Street Station. And I'll point that out on this. You can see this yellow one that comes up from Centralia, roughly. That's the S line, and it's currently not up to passenger standards. And the bridge that crosses James River there is also not up to passenger standards. So trains coming from Norfolk have to take the A line, which is that western looking blue line, around downtown Richmond, across the A line bridge to access Staples Mill Station. So any trains coming from Norfolk currently don't serve Main Street Station in Richmond. With the improvements to the S line, you can have all trains serving Main Street Station, and again, this is much further down the road. And then this next point about the NCDOT collaboration with VPRA is to and talking about improving the S line down to North Carolina, and talk about that a little bit. Next slide, please. And the Petersburg Ettrick Station, that's an improvement project that we're working on to improve the parking lot down there. If anybody's been to the Petersburg Station on the parking lot.
It's other Chesterfield, actually.
So that's, it's a good point, because Amtrak calls it the Petersburg Station, we call it the Ettrick Station. So anytime you see it, it's at Petersburg/Ettrick. So the parking lot down there is in rough shape. It's, the platform is currently not ADA accessible. The lighting is in bad shape, and there are some other issues at the station that we've received a grant from the Federal Road Administration of $6.3 million to improve that station. Chesterfield County is also working on improving Bessie Lane, which serves that station. So it's kind of be a holistic approach to the whole station area, and it'll be in a lot better shape when that's completed. Next slide, please. So the S line that I mentioned before is another big project that's going on in collaboration. VPRA and NCDOT are looking at building out the S line corridor from Petersburg down to Raleigh. And it'll provide a direct link from Charlotte, Raleigh into the Northeast. And you can see that dotted line is the S line. It's currently abandoned. We've acquired the right of way on the Virginia side. NCDOT is acquired on the NCDOT on the North Carolina side. Currently, trains have to from Raleigh go serve Selma, Rocky Mountain, and kind of make a looping pattern. It's not the most expeditious trip up to the Northeast. So North Carolina recently received a grant from the Federal Administration for $58 million on preliminary engineering on that project. And lastly, the next slide, please. The future train sets, which was an announcement made by Amtrak recently, the current fleet of Amtrak trains that serve Virginia and the state sponsored services were, I think they were built before I was born, and I'm not that young. And so the new fleet is going to be a much better passenger experience. They're going to have more efficient audio and visual announcements when trains arrive. Well, currently it is a more environmentally friendly mode of transportation. These are going to be more environmentally friendly. The Siemens trains are going to be constructed in Sacramento, California. And the most important part of these is that they'll be dual power, which means if anyone's taking the train from Richmond into the Northeast, when you pull into Main Street Station, or sorry, Union Station, you have to swap out the locomotive, which can take 45 minutes to an hour, and sometimes longer. This new train set, it's just going to pull up, it's going to extend the pantograph, and it's going to connect to the overhead catenary system on the Northeast corridor and just take off. It's a flip of the switch. They may have to resupply the train, but it's going to be much quicker. Happy to answer. Next slide. Any questions that anyone have? If I don't have the answer, I will get back to you.
Mr. Hodges.
Represent the town of Ashland. We're fascinated by this presentation.
Take that picture and view.
I had a couple of questions, and one was about the train we saw. A concern when you're traveling from New York to Richmond is that there's like a 45-minute wait in DC for the engines to be switched out from diesel, or if they're coming from the north, from electric to diesel. I understand the new engines will be hybrids and be able to.
Yeah, that's great. That's the dual mode where they'll this is a flip of the switch where the pantograph, kind of like a arm that extends and will connect to the wires going north. Southbound, they just have to bring it back down and continue south. So they'll have diesel and electric.
That's great. It sounds like a really significant improvement. My other question relates to a project, not trying to get into the weeds, but you did mention passenger experience. Ashland has an unmanned train station, and we have 2 tracks. And the typical question is which side of the track a train is coming from, and you literally have to stand in the front because it's hard to get from one side of the track to the other with the luggage and kids and everything. In your budget, you have money for the city of Richmond and for passenger improvements. That is telling you which side of the tracks the trains are coming on or which track it's coming on. And Ashland is in there. We've been advised that Ashland PIDS project, passenger information installation system, the acronym is behind, or we're having to wait until the city's system is put in before they'll focus on our system. And as a request, taking advantage of this opportunity, we hope you will consider letting our system run concurrently, or at least review our project concurrently with the cities, not to slow them down. But it is a safety problem that's every day in the town.
Absolutely, yeah, I recall, I was formerly at the RRTPO, and then this.
Colin, you have some help.
Yeah, I was, it's being spending that project right now, actually, so she could probably speak to it better than I can.
So, yeah, we get regular information from Ashland about the issue with people standing on the middle of tracks. And so the reason we did the Main Street one first was just to get the agreement format. This is the first time we are doing a PID system in Virginia, the PPRA is sponsoring. So getting the agreement right was the first step. So we have the Main Street agreement in place. About to kick off the project. There's a huge delay on the Amtrak side. But I'm happy to report that the Ashland agreement is with us. It's currently under review, and we can try to get it done as soon as possible. And to your point, we recognize that Ashland has more of a need than Main Street. So we try to do everything in our power to expedite that project.
Thank you. I appreciate the response.
Ms. O'Bannon?
Well, when you said dual power, I mean, and I get the electric, you said diesel, so they're gonna continue to use diesel dual?
Correct, yeah, and I'm not a mechanical or electrical engineer by any means, but what I understand, the diesel is required for the power.
Well, I know south, they're an electric, but they are gonna continue to use.
Correct, the south of DC is not electrified, and that is, yeah, that's how things currently are. I will say that none of the projects that we are doing preclude electrification. We're not talking about electrifying the corridor at all, but there are still a number of considerations if that were to be done. For instance, the freights will still be operating partially on our right of way, and they have the double stack trains, which don't allow for the catering systems.
I did take the auto train in July from Lorton to Sanford, Florida. And I wish they would have a location somewhere that, well, it took us at a 1 hour and 45-minute trip from Richmond to Lorton. It took us 3 hours because of traffic. And I was hoping they used to have another stop somewhere, I think it was North Carolina.
Yeah, it was Columbia, South Carolina, or
South Carolina.
I think it was South Carolina.
Why did they eliminate that?
That I don't know. And those the auto train is one of the long distance trains considered.
Yes.
Amtrak kind of has full ownership over that. But in terms of the 3 hour trip from Richmond to Lorton, that is one of the things we're trying to address with the projects. They're building out the infrastructure that can separate the freight and passenger. So, you know, they can get out of the way.
Well, it's auto train for a reason, I get that. I mean, you loaded the car up and then put the car on the train, they put the car on the train. But we drove our car from Richmond to Lorton.
Oh, I see, sorry. I thought on the way back.
And the traffic was on a Friday, not a Saturday, or it was a Friday, and it took us 3 hours with the traffic. That was one of the reasons we chose to go on the train. But just to let everybody know, it's a very nice experience once you got on the train.
And that was probably in good weather.
Yes, it was very good weather. But
So,
anyway,
thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Yes,
Sorry, love the picture. It's Ashland, Amtrak train going to the center of the universe. not interested. I did, if I may, I had a question about, the ACA yard, confusion. I heard you speak to the passenger rail. Are there plans to address the, issues in the ACA yard?
Yes, that's on slide page 12 here. The, back up a little bit, there's.
If I may, Colin, just so we, the issues in ACA yard, what did you understand that to mean, the issues in ACA? I just wanted to clarify, because I heard you talking about the layover and that sort of stuff.
So ACA yard is a CSX yard owned by CSX, and there's currently no dedicated passenger track through there. So they've done their best to accommodate passenger trains. One of the projects that we're looking at beyond phase 2 is to construct a dedicated passenger track that will serve passenger trains only. So no CSX trains are allowed to be owned by the Commonwealth. If they want to access it, they can pay an access fee, but we'll be in charge of that entire track. So we can go directly from Staples Mill to Main Street without any kind of interruption.
Gotcha. Is that?
Yes.
Answer your question? Okay.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. To help me understand, do you have anything that can show me, provide me with what exists today in terms of passenger transportation? Secondly, what is being proposed? What is the timeline for the proposed routes to come into being? And what is the cost? And just as important, where is the money going to come from for funding the transportation improvements for the lines that you talked about?
I did have a financial breakdown slide, which I did not include in this because it was a little all over the place.
But I would like to have a copy of that, again, showing the existing ridership, the routes that are in play today. Okay, and then what's being proposed, showing over years for the enhancements that you've covered that extend from Potomac with Long Bridge down to Raleigh, Charlottesville. What I want to know is, when do we expect those lines, or what are your improvements? When do we expect them to come into play? And what is the cost? And where is the money coming from?
Okay, so I can answer one of those in this presentation immediately. On slide 10, there is a graphic that shows when the new routes are anticipated to.
I'm sorry, I can't read that. Yeah, you put it up, you might as well, I think that, Mr. Chair, I think we can make sure everybody gets a copy.
Yeah. We'll have
I can't read that, so.
I apologize for that. Yeah, it's a little busy, but we wanted to show the whole suite.
Okay, is that showing where the money's coming from?
That is not included on this slide.
Okay.
There are a number of sources. We've received $944 million from Amtrak. There was the Intercity Passenger Rail Operating Capital Fund, formerly DRPT, which was combined with the Rail Enhancement Fund. And then,
But I want to see the different pots of money that make up the funding of these transportation improvements that you're proposing over what period of time?
And thank you, Mr. Williams. I'm going to go ahead and jump in now. We'll keep it open for questions, but I'll jump in and ask, thank you for going back to this slide. Stepping back a little bit, Virginia, you're the Virginia authority. So I know right away when you start talking about getting us to, Raleigh and places beyond and Florida and all that, there has to be some other cooperation. So you have, obviously, I think for us in the region, I'm curious to how I can get to Washington and Northern Virginia and Norfolk and closer in the region. And I'm going to definitely spend some time on that slide and try to see where. But just even stepping back from that, I'm curious, you talked about Amtrak runs on your infrastructure or infrastructure, freight infrastructure that you have agreements with. Is that in general how this works?
yeah, it's going to kind of evolve over time. So currently they operate on the CSX infrastructure. It's 2-track, 3 tracks, and sometimes 4-track within the corridor, depending on where you are. And we currently own the right of way adjacent to the track. Over time, as we build these projects out, those projects will become our property. Virginia's property.
So you have some rights along existing PSX track. The money that David wants to see the source of, you're gonna put rail down on those places, and
Yes.
that's gonna be owned by the authority.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
But the plan now is you're not gonna start running authority trains, you're gonna have agreements with the foreseeable future is Amtrak train will be operating.
Well, there's still gonna be Amtrak. Amtrak is kind of the operator, well, is the operator at this point in time. And they'll continue to be the operator. They have given an agreement with them to be the operator for a number of years. But the trains will be leased and maintained with VPRA funding. And the operations will be funded by VPRA. But then keep in mind also ticket revenue then comes straight back to VPRA. For all this.
So in the meantime, Amtrak gets all the ticket revenue or?
No, surely, so any train, it's very, very confusing with this, but the trains that are, there's like I was mentioning, the long distance trains, that is, all Amtrak receives the revenue for that. The state sponsored services, the ones that serve, direct Roanoke, Richmond, Newport News and Norfolk, that ticket revenue comes to Virginia. Now, if you get off, say you get on in Richmond and go to New York, Virginia will receive a portion of that's in Virginia. If you get on in Richmond and get off in Alexandria, Richmond will receive all of that funding from the ticket revenues.
Okay, that's actually helpful, but it's interesting, is the focus, your focus, and your team's focus, is it on intra-Virginia rail, or is it more on up and down the East Coast?
It's
beyond?
to preserve passenger rail in Virginia, but we kind of have to also acknowledge the fact that there are other trains passing through Virginia. So the rail that we build out is for Virginia trains, but there happen to also be other trains passing through and operating on it. And the way Amtrak kind of treats Virginia is, I would say, unique in terms of other states, where this is just kind of anecdotal, but other states their trains will be called, say, the Piedmont of the Carolina in North Carolina, because those are fully captured within North Carolina. Virginia trains are not, it's considered an uncaptured fleet. So once the trains move on into the Northeast Corridor, they are a part of the Northeast Corridor. So they're only a Virginia train while they're in the boundaries of Virginia.
So last question, this is interesting, we can spend more time, we have a lot, but thank you so much. We always hear, at least maybe anecdotally, when you read Amtrak's always losing money and losing money. So when we start putting rail down and Amtrak's going to continue to ride on authorities rail, how are you, Amtrak's not going to keep running a train that's not being occupied, right? They're going to say, hey, we're not getting the expected ridership. So whose decision is it to, change a route? Whose decision is it to man Ashland Station when it gets to the point that, hey, this is becoming an issue? Who does Ashland have to fund that? Does Amtrak fund it?
If Amtrak's, if it's not an Amtrak station, they typically don't man them. That's something that we would like to work closely with municipalities to figure out a way to have, people working at these stations. In Main Street Station, I know it's not the best model, but they do have security personnel who are it's an unmanned station, but they have security personnel who announce the arrival times. And then the PIDs, the passenger information display systems.
So I asked you too many questions. The first question was, the routes, because obviously you're doing a lot of planning, and that's where we come into planning. Where are people going to ride these trains? And so how do you measure like oops or how do you say, it's time to run every hour?
Right, yeah, and we do monitor the ridership closely, and the on-time performance. And the decision is, I would say, it's a collaborative decision between Amtrak and Virginia. I would say it's led by Virginia, but if, for instance, during the pandemic, when things were happening and no one's really sure of the environment, Amtrak approached us, and we have an agreement with them that says anytime that they want to cancel service, they have to do it within, I forget the number of days, 30, 60 days. Same with us, if we want to cancel service within 30, 60, 90 days, we have to give that notice in writing ahead of time. Where Amtrak approached us and recommended that we So the decision ultimately falls on Virginia, say for Virginia trains, but Amtrak will approach us with recommendations. That I think we should, hold service because of this pandemic and
Gotcha.
we don't know what's going on.
So the last question, these things, the projections you're talking about in the future, they've already been done in collaboration with Amtrak and others in terms of where you think their support is needed? The slide that's on there that talks about your future with all these rail plans.
Yes, Amtrak is aware of the.
I mean, well, hopefully they're more aware that you help participate with it, right?
Correct. As we get closer to the actual launch of these services, Amtrak will work with the schedules and determine the most efficient ridership.
So I get, your answer, because it's really a collaborative kind of effort. Okay, this is good. Miss Savannah, yeah.
Right, who is responsible to pay for, who will be paying for the reconstruction of the Staples Mill Road section, a station, and the Ettrick station? Who is responsible to build new buildings?
I guess it depends on who the owner is. This is nothing's easy on this. For instance, the Ettrick station, the land is owned by BPRA, but the station is actually owned by Amtrak. So that's another thing we're gonna have to work very closely with them. It's the same with Staples Mill, where I think Amtrak actually owns. I don't have it off the top of my head, so don't quote me on this, but they may own the platform, the building, and then I think we own the parking lot. So it's something we have to work with Amtrak.
Because it took a couple of governors to pay for the paving, the parking.
Yes, there was I remember that there was a lot of hurt there. In terms of landowners around there.
There's a lot of backroom conversation.
Yeah,
about that.
Well, that's my point.
Okay.
You had a slide at the beginning that just, and I know you're passenger, but it was a bullet point that you said that freight, and it was in the context, I think, of, trying to relieve pressure on our highways. It said freight shipping, freight on rail needs to increase by, I think it was like the 45%. It was quite a jump.
And that's
Where did that come from? And I'm just wondering how does it impact rail? Why is it in your presentation?
so that was a projection done by the Port of Virginia. So we work with them and when they build out their new facility, they have a massive facility down there and it's intermodal. So the shipping containers come up off the chain, they put them right on the rail, and then they're anticipating a growth up to 45% by 2040.
Okay.
Sorry, 40% of their current cargo is transported by. Sorry, hold on. Reading the slide. 34% is currently moved by rail from the Port of Virginia. By 2040, 45% is moved by rail.
Okay, so that wasn't like the goal. I was wondering when I read those, like that's an aspirational goal that the rail authority was pursuing to try to get more freight on rails, and I was like wondering why that was in your.
Sorry, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. It's very informative. I appreciate both of you joining us today. Thank you.
We'll be around if anyone has any.
Thank you. And you'll give us this, we'll have the slide, and if you don't, we already have the slide. If you don't mind adding that, sending us the financial slide, so.
Okay, yeah,
I'll be shared with.
I'll go back and see what kind of product.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's something that exists like that has all three together, but there are individual ones.
Oh, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Next, action item coming up, our tip amendments. Mr. Parsons, you want to? Well, Mr. Butchman's gonna jump right in.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So this is a set of tip amendments requested by VDOT. Quick overview, there are two new projects that are being proposed to be added to the tip. And just as a reminder, all of our new project amendments require a demonstration of physical constraint that we can pay for the projects, air quality conformity, a public review, the TAC review, and then the policy board's approval. So the two projects that are proposed, first is a parallel routes operations study. This is part of the I-95 corridor improvement plan. So this is a few years ago, VDOT undertook a study of all of the major interstates in the region and came up with a list of proposed projects and improvements for those operations. This is essentially a refinement, a next step to get to the actual projects on the ground. So this is $150,000. It's state funding proposed right now, and this is just for the study. And it's this fiscal year. and as a study, it's exempt for any sort of conformity purposes. The second project is a replacement bridge on Meadow Road in Henrico County over Forest Swamp. This one is also exempt for air quality. It's a reconstruction of an existing bridge with no additional capacity. The total cost of this project is just under $2.2 million. The proposed amendment would add funding and obligations for fiscal year 23 for the PE phase, for the engineering phase of the project. This one is an exciting project in some sense because this is the first one we've had that is the bridge formula funds. So this is an outcome of the IIJA, and this has grown our capacity for bridges in the state by about 80%, I believe. So it's a big win overall. So TAC reviewed this project. They recommended approval unanimously. We held our public review over the past month. Unfortunately, it was still right during the holiday period because of the schedules with the TAC meeting in December and then this meeting at the beginning of the year. But we did our same routine of posting the pages on our website, opening them up for public review. We didn't receive any comments, again, likely due to the holiday period. So the action that is requested today is that the board approves the two amendments to add the two new projects and also resolve that both are exempt from a conformity analysis as the planning and technical study and the safety reconstructing bridges with no additional travel lanes. So with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions about the proposed request.
Thank you, Mr. Bushing. Any questions of Mr. Bushing on these two tip amendments?
Move the resolution.
Sorry,
Move the
you
resolution.
move the resolution, and both resolutions to add them and that they are exempt from conformity. Is that your motion?
Resolved and found resolved. Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Van and Dr. Newbill. Seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call and vote.
Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Atkins. Mr. Carroll. Mr. Holland. Chair Lumpkin.
Yes.
Ms. Lastelet.
Yes.
Vice Chair Peterson.
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon.
Aye.
Ms. Page. Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Page, we got you.
Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Ms. Jordan.
Aye.
Dr. Newbill.
Aye.
Ms. Adams.
Aye.
Mr. Ridley.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you, and you're still in place. You have the next item. We're going to old business project cost estimates. We've been at it a little over an hour. What's the desire of the policy board? Keep going, or do we want to take a 4 or 5 minute stretch break? This is going to be about how long, Mr. Bushing, as your presentation?
I believe we have about a half hour on the agenda for this.
I'm good.
Good to keep going.
Let's go.
Okay. So, we'll dive into the regional projects, and I think you have slides before that. So, yeah, there we go.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So in response to the board's request at the last meeting, what we've compiled is a history of all the current projects that are active, underway already, or recently completed but not yet closed out. So we tried to put all those together for you in one place so you can review all of them to inform the discussion about cost estimates, how we're doing as a program, and if there's any direction that you would like TAC to take. So in your packet, you have this presentation, but there's a project page for each of the projects, which gives you an idea of the sponsor, what is the project, kind of when did we select it, when did it start, how much of it is funded by the TPO, what's been the change in TPO funding and cost estimates over time, and then any other important notes in terms of the project's history. And then there's on the right-hand side, there's a graphic showing the cost estimate over time broken out by phase as requested and the TPO's funding on the project over time. And if it has the red star in the corner, the top right corner, that is a project that's currently requesting additional funding from the TPO. So that would come back to this board in 2 more months with the allocations program. So the first project in here is in Hanover County, the Route 360 widening project. This is an old project, as you can see, the online, the 6-year program only goes back to 2004, and it goes all the way back, all the way to the 2004 program. But as you can see over time, it was relatively stable. And then when the cost started increasing beyond what the TPO had funded, the county went through the Smart Scale program and sought additional funding for the project. Due to the recent trends with inflation, the project is going up again. And there is a pending request for additional funding. Additional funding was awarded last year as well. So you can see it's about 45% funded by the TPO now, 156% cost increase from essentially where we had a baseline where it leveled off in 2012. And it's 15% above the cost at selection. So essentially our funding has exceeded what the original estimate was and gone up a little bit more over time. But the majority of the cost increase has been covered by outside sources. And this project is locally administered by the jurisdiction. The next project in here is the Route 1 intersection improvement. This is in the city of Richmond. So this is one that had a major change in project scope. So originally this was conceived of as a widening project on Route 1. A few years back, as you can see, the cost estimate changes drastically. It was rescoped as an intersection improvement at 2 of the major intersections. So the TPO funding has remained consistent throughout that rescoped project. But again, with recent cost inflation, the costs are up over the past year or so. But no change in our commitment since it's been rescoped. The next project that we have in the program is the Commerce Road widening in the city of Richmond. This is another one that is a legacy project back to 2004 or earlier. The TPO did not get involved until the 2014 fiscal year. So this project had a long history before, and then we were involved since 2014. The one thing to note, this one had significant cost increases since we selected and chose to participate in funding it. It's 439% change since that fiscal year 14 to where we are now. And our funding has gone up 32% above what the total estimate was when it was selected. So significant increase in TPO commitment as well. The other interesting thing to note on this one is you can see it's highlighted in the last 2 years. This project was bid a year ago and they weren't able to award the bid. So this is just noting that there's been one bid and the project has to come up for a second round of bidding to get this project moving forward. Again, this one has another request for funding currently to the TPO. The next one we have is Jenk Road, also in the city of Richmond. This is another legacy project dating back before 2004. This one was a scope change as well. Originally, it was a widening project. It was how it was originally envisioned. It later became more of a streetscape improvement, so there's a shared use path. It's not a widening anymore. So it's kind of a change in the overall scope of this project, which you can see reflected in the 2012 decrease in the total estimate. The estimate was pretty flat. This project was actually bid. There was a notice of intent to award. The project went through this whole process to award, didn't move into construction. So everything since 2019 that's highlighted in here has kind of been after a failed award on the project. And so now the costs have started escalating again, partially due to the recent COVID inflation. But you can see it's a 243% increase since the full award in 2008, or for the original full award in 2008. And then our funds are 114% above what that original full estimate was. This one is again locally administered project. The next one is Forest Hill Avenue. This is another legacy. This one is completed. So this was same sort of idea. It was originally a widening concept, and then it moved to more of a streetscape, a more multimodal approach to the project. So focused on the sidewalks, the bike lanes, is a median instead of a 5-lane 2-way left turns. This is again, a pretty significant increase over time. 276% increase in cost from the first full estimate back in 2007. It was only 17% increase since it was rescoped to that streetscape type project. So it was, once it settled on the final shape of the project, it was relatively stable. Again, this is locally administered. TPO funding, as you can see with the yellow line, continued to increase, and this was almost fully funded, 97% by the TPO. The next one is in Henrico County. This is also one of the legacy projects. This is has two UPCs. The PE is in one UPC and right-of-way construction are in another. So I combine them to make it easier to track the total project. This one is largely funded by the TPO as well, 74%. It's had a significant increase. As you can see, it was relatively stable from when it was selected through 2018. Since it's been refined and the scope has changed, you can see right away has increased significantly, as have the construction costs. So the TPO funding in this project is 315% above that first full estimate. And this has been a 461% total cost increase. Again, this one is locally administered. The next one is Dabbs House Road, also in Henrico. And I believe this one is completed already. This one was, it's an older project. The TPO didn't get involved until a few years after it had already been in the 6-year program. And actually it did pretty good as far as that went. The estimate went down compared to what we selected it at. So that was a plus. The TPO funding commitment, however, did go up. So we continued to fund more of the total cost of that project over time. So this was locally administered. The next one is another Henrico project that's still active, and this is Stadler Road. The PE side of it has a very old UPC, it's a 2006 project in the 6-year program. And then there's a separate UPC for right-of-way construction. Again, this one is about 58% funded by the TPO. It has increased 100%, 104% since we selected it. And the TPO funds have increased 18% above that full cost when we selected it. So we only picked up part of the cost, and the cost have exceeded the original full cost of the project now to the TPO. The next one that we analyzed was in Hanover County. So this is the Creighton and Cold Harbor roundabout project. This was a 2009 project, almost fully funded by the TPO. It more than doubled in cost and more than doubled in cost to the TPO over the course of that project. But this one is completed now and ready for closeout. This is a project in New Kent County. So this is the Route 155 widened shoulders. This is part of what was envisioned as a courthouse to courthouse connector between Charles City and New Kent courthouses. So the TPO funding was originally conceived of for that project. Then we dropped it down to really just the PE level of the project. As you can see, it decreased in 2014. And then this project went through the smart scale process. So smart scale funding filled the rest of the project, and it actually decreased in cost from where we were. And the TPO funding actually wound up decreasing. So this one was a success on that side for our program. The next project is the Route 10 Super Street in Chesterfield County. So this is a project, huge project, and this is a $65 million project in the county. When we picked it up, it was a $30 million project, so it has seen significant increase in the total estimate over time. What has been good on this side is the TPO funding has gone up about 86%, but we haven't taken on the majority of those increased costs. So this project went through the smart scale process. Smart scale funding was found and covered a large portion of the increase. So it's kind of what we talked about before, going out, finding other funding sources and leveraging the TPO's funds to find additional revenues. The next one is in Henrico County. This is Parham and Patterson. This was also a smart scale project. Originally, so on the graphs, and this is something I was trying to note, but originally we only show PE funding on there. The intent was always to fund additional. Sometimes we only have money in the year, so we can only do PE, and then we add right away a couple years later. So it's not always accurate to look at the level, but what you can see is from the peak of our TPO commitment to this project of above $10 million, we actually decreased our commitment, and where we wound up was a 14% decrease from the peak of what the TPO had previously committed to this project. And overall, the project went down 3% through that smart scale process. So this was also another success. The project came in under budget and really worked out for the TPO. The trolley line trail, this is the town of Ashland. So this is the very beginning or the very end of the fall line, however you want to look at it. But this project was 100% TPO funded. So this is one that we picked up. And this was before the fall line. This was when it was just the trolley line concept. But you can see it increased about 55% over the course of the project, and our commitment to it likewise increased as it was fully funded by the TPO. Again, this one was locally administered. The next one we have is another one that's requesting funding this year. This is Deepwater Terminal in the city of Richmond. So this project is another one where there's a history of several years before the TPO was involved with the project. So we began involvement in the fiscal year 2019. And at this point, it's now 65% funded by the TPO. Our costs have increased significantly. So you can see it's 124% above our award. Because in this case, we weren't expecting to pick up the full cost of the project. And it's increased in cost 71% since it was selected. And this is, again, since 2019, when this one was selected. And again, actually, no, this one's also locally administered. Ridgefield Parkway sidewalk, this is in Henrico County. And to Mrs. O'Bannon's question in the executive committee, even though projects are completed, sometimes they're not financially closed out yet. And it takes a couple years sometimes for the final processing of all the financial closeouts. And so they stay in the 6-year program through that period. So even though a project may be done, it'll still show up and there shouldn't be changes to anything at that point. But this one, again, it was selected in 2014. It had a 95% cost increase. And this one was essentially the original estimate was reviewed by a consultant, brought on board, and it was under. I will note that this is also a 600,000 to going up to $1 million. It's a much smaller scale than some of the other ones we've seen. But again, this was locally administered and a pretty large jump in both cost and TPO commitment. The Mayo Bridge in the city of Richmond, this project is one that looks really weird in the numbers, and part of it is because the scope was completely changed on the project. So when the TPO selected it, it was a $2.5 million project, and the intent was really just a rehab of the deck. It was, mostly resurfacing, making it so it's a usable deck for the project. Over time, it evolved. There was congressional funding put on the project, and it's evolved into a full superstructure replacement, I believe. So it's a much bigger project. It's now $90 million. It's only 7% TPO funded at this point because the cost has grown so much. But our funds are 161% above what the original estimate was when this project first came into us. And again, now this is a VDOT administered project. So with this transition, it's switched from a locally administered project to a VDOT administered project. Route 10 widening, this is Chesterfield County. This one's actually a pretty good, this is kind of the median project for our program, sort of. So this was selected in 2014. Again, as I mentioned before, the funding wasn't really intended to be just PE at any point. It was just that was what we could fund when we first picked it. The intent was to fund the full project, but that project has increased 26% above cost, the cost estimate when it was selected, and our funding also has gone up. And this is locally administered. I will also note that this, as I mentioned, the 26% is right at our median project. So that's the average in our program right now is 26% cost increase. And I'll go over that a little bit more later. The next project we have is also in Chesterfield County. This is our Route 360 widening. So this, I did make sure to mention it here, but again, it was a PE only, then we added right away, then we moved up to construction. 92% TPO funded. It was 28% cost increase since it was selected. And our TPO funds have only gone up 17%. So where we're at now is only 17% above that original full estimate. So in this one, we've done a pretty good job of keeping the costs down. This is the one that I think has triggered really this whole discussion, is the Route 623 intersection in Goochland County that came before you last time. So this project goes back to fiscal year 2015. So originally this was a $1.9 million estimate, and the TPO was only covering a portion of it. The county had funds identified for the rest of it out of their secondary program. For fiscal year 2020, the cost increased up to $5.5 million on the project, and the TPO picked up the cost and agreed to fund that difference. Last year, as we all know, the cost came back after VDOT review, and it was a $15 million project. And at the TAC recommendation and policy board approval, we found a way to fund the full $15 million on this project. This was originally expected to be a locally administered project, again, because it was only a $1.9 million project originally. It's now VDOT administered project, and the cost has increased significantly. So we had a 729% increase since selection and 949% funding increase above our original award. So this and the Mayo Bridge are the two that look the worst in terms of the estimates. And this one is the worst in terms of our evolving commitment to the project. The next one is a signal system project in the city of Richmond, selected in 2015. 100% TPO funded, only 16% change over the life of the project, locally administered. And this one, I believe, is completed as well. Next one is in Henrico County, Azalea pedestrian and signal improvements. No change over the life of the project. So this one has done really well on that side. The Dundas Road Bridge. So this is an interesting one. It was originally selected by the TPO as a pedestrian bridge project. So the intent was to provide pedestrian access. It sort of evolved into replacing the existing road bridge along with pedestrian access. So kind of serving both goals. We haven't really changed our commitment over time. It's been pretty flat to what the original project was. It's just combined the additional project scope there. And that's mostly been picked up through the state of good repair, which is the bridge funding. So it was replace the existing bridge and add on the pedestrian elements. I will note the last year looks really bad. And what happened there's two separate UPCs that VDOT was using to track the Dundas Road Bridge. And when you combine them, it was about 12 or 13 million. And so the difference isn't as drastic as it appears, but they all showed up under one UPC for whatever reason with this latest revision. But again, this one has increased significantly over time, but it's sort of based on the changing scope. The TPO funds are 21% above what we'd originally committed. The Parham Signal and Sidewalk Project in Henrico County. So this is another one that is a smart scale project. The TPO put some funding on it in 2017. It went through the smart scale process, and the estimate was actually revised downward as part of the smart scale review. Since then, with COVID impacts, the estimate has gone back up slightly above what our original $5 million estimate was. So we have a total of a 5% cost increase overall. And the TPO funding is 19% above our original award. And again, this one's a little weird. The TPO has basically stepped in because of the lower estimate with smart scale. We've kind of backfilled into the gap up to the 5 million again, is essentially what's happened. The Pole Green widening. So this is a Hanover County project. It's a relatively recent one, 2017. As you can see, once we got up to our full funding level in 2020, there hasn't been any change in terms of our commitment. The cost has gone up, but that has been covered by other funding sources, so it hasn't come back through the TPO. Henrico County, this is the traffic management system. So this is an upgrade to this signal and management system. 100% TPO funded, 15% change over the life of the project. And terms of the cost and 16% in terms of award. We had awarded slightly less than the total estimate that when originally selected. The next one is the Chesterfield County project. So this is Route 1, and it's now part of the Fall Line Trail. So this is a smart scale project. Largely what's happened with this one in terms of cost is the scope has evolved to incorporate the fall line, which wasn't conceived of at the time. And so that has led to some of the cost increases on here. The TPO funding that's gone up, it was actually another situation here. We had CMAQ funds that were expiring, so they had been on other projects. They were surplus to those projects when they were closed out. And there's a requirement to put them and use them within a certain amount of time. Since it took a while to close out those projects, we had to move quickly. This was the only project that we had in our CMAQ program that had local funding on it that could be used to leverage. There was no match money. So this was the only one that we had that could be used for that. And so that was the rationale behind awarding additional funding to this project in 2023. The next one is Route 1 improvements in the town of Ashland. So this is widening and streetscape improvements on Route 1. This is largely TPO funded as well. It's seen a 55% increase in costs over time, 53% increase in TPO funding. And there is a pending application on this one as well. And I guess I should note, with applications that are coming before you for additional requests, we intend to provide these tables again, along with the new estimate and kind of what the funding would look like to put it into perspective for future meetings. This one is VDOT administered. The next one, we have the port gate improvement and drop lot project. So this is a 2019 project. It's now split among 4 different UPCs for procurement, so it's a little harder to track. But it's 100% funded by the TPO. Again, a 52% cost increase over the course of this project. But I think everything is looking good and no likely changes expected on this one now. The next one is 3 chop sidewalk in Henrico. So this is another recent one, 2019, 100% funded by the TPO, no increase in cost. So TPO funding has gone up 6%. Essentially what happened, we approved a transfer to allow additional funding on the project to advance the right-of-way phase. So funding was mismatched with the project schedule. And given recent inflationary trends, we haven't pulled that money off yet, kind of waiting to see what happens when it goes out for a bid. So it's been left on there, but once the construction contract is awarded, the funding would come off if it's plus. The next is a transit stop access project in the city of Richmond. Again, this one has stayed on budget, no change in cost, no change in TPO funding over the life of the project. The Route 1 sidewalk in Chesterfield County. So this is a case where the estimate increased in 2021 and then actually decreased in 22 and 23. But the TPO was committed to 100% funding, and we at this point left it at the higher funding level. Again, waiting to see what happens with the construction and awards on this project. This one is Early Settlers Road sidewalk. This is also Chesterfield County. This is a relatively inexpensive project, $1.1 million. There's been no change so far. However, there's a pending request for an additional funding on this one. The bulkhead repair at the port. This is a 2020 project, 100% funded by the TPO. There's been a 12% decrease in cost since selection, and TPO funds have stayed level. So if there's any surplus, as we've seen with some of the others, the funds will come back to the TPO to be re-awarded to another project. The Route 60 shared use path. So this one is another one where it looks a little weirder than it is. There were 2 separate projects that were combined as they were adjacent to each other, and the combined estimate is stayed flat the entire life of the project. So no change in cost, no change in TPO commitments in these projects. Next one we have is the Libby Avenue Road Diet. So this is in Henrico County. 13% cost increase in selection, and there is a pending request to the TPO to fund that gap that you can see. The next one we have is Meadowdale Bike Ped. So this was 100% funded by the TPO, no changes over the life of this project. The next one's the signal system, phase 4 in the city of Richmond. This is a very recent project, no changes, 100% TPO funded. The next two are in Henrico County, and I believe these are the last two. So West Broad pedestrian transit improvements, this is a 2021 selection. The intent has always been to fully fund the project. We just didn't have enough money upfront to commit to it all right at the get-go. It's seen a 6% increase, and the TPO last round decided to commit that extra 6% to the project. So we have gone ahead and fully funded it, and I believe it's scheduled to start next fiscal year. And then the last one we have is West Broad, Dominion and Cox. Again, this is a similar case. We fully intended to fund the project at the beginning. In this case, the project was originally scheduled for fiscal year 21, and we wound up pushing it back to fiscal year 23 to work with the locality on funding and with VDOT as well. So that delay led to some of the cost increase, and then the other part of it was this is a VDOT administered project, and when VDOT had a chance to actually review it, the cost came in a little higher. So it's a combination of changing the schedule, additional inflation, and changing the administration of the project. So on the whole, our projects are performing reasonably well. So the median project, as I mentioned, is about 26% over budget. What you're seeing here, this red and green curves, this is what AASHTO is sort of expects based on how developed the project is at the time that you start working on it, how much the cost estimate could change. So in terms of the median project, we're about 26% above the original estimate.
Can you give a clarification on the x-axis that's cut off on the screen?
Oh, sure. So the y-axis is the percent of the original estimate that we're currently at. The x-axis is essentially what percentage of development the project was at when it was selected. So most of the TPO's projects are on the lower end. We're usually, 0 to 10 or 15% of the project has been developed by the time we select it. So everything's going to tend toward that left side of the curve, which means you do expect greater increases in project costs because you don't know everything. There's a lot of unknowns as you're going into the project. As you narrow down the band, you get more information, the cost range gets narrowed. So whenever we have a cost estimate, it's really a most likely estimate within a range, and that's what we're shooting for here. So the median project is doing pretty good. The average, which is the mean project, is above and outside of that curve. And the reason we see that is because of those handful of projects. A lot of those old legacy projects that we were talking about, that 2004, 2005, 2006 projects that are still not completed, as well as like the Mayo Bridge, which was a completely change in scope, and the Goochland project. So those are the big ones that drive up the overall average. But in terms of our median, the middle project, it looks pretty good. So to summarize, 39 projects were analyzed that were underway or waiting to close out. And these are varying stages of development, from those that have just started PE all the way through those projects that are completed and just waiting to close out. As I mentioned, the median project, the estimate went up by 26%. TPO funding only went up by 19%. So we're doing pretty good with the median. It's those handful of older projects that are skewing the average overall. So the estimate, as you can see, 198% above what selection, and TPO funding up 71%. So we're nearly doubling our commitment to these projects over their life. There were 11 projects where we had estimates that were 2 times or more the original baseline. So whether it was a percentage of the project that we committed to, or if it was the full project that we committed to, these are more than double whatever that level was. 6 of those are those projects from the 2000s or earlier. So the kind of what I was calling the legacy projects. And then 5 were from the early 2010s. This later 2010s and into the 2020s, so far we haven't seen the same level. Again, those projects haven't had an opportunity to sit out there and experience the same changes, but we haven't seen the same level of cost increases yet. We had 8 projects where the TPO's funding commitment at least doubled or more over the life of the project. So those, again, fall into the same subset of projects with estimates doubling. And on the whole, I know one of the questions we talked about was the locally administered and whether that's something we want to continue doing with local administration and local estimates. 74% of our program is locally administered projects. So these last two slides aren't in the packet. These are kind of some things that for the policy board to consider as you move into this discussion and look for direction to get TAC. Some options that exist for increasing the impacts of the overruns. We may not be able to eliminate the overruns completely, but we can reduce some of the impacts. So some of it is to use more conservative assumptions when we're selecting the projects. So Smart Scale does this by always essentially deferring to the VDOT estimate. By doing that, there are some more conservative assumptions baked in, which tend to drive the cost a little bit higher, but you don't wind up with as many overruns that way. The risk-based contingency, which is the new cost estimating approach that I've mentioned in the last few meetings, by focusing on that risk-based contingency, we're really looking at what don't we know about the project yet that we need to be prepared for in a worst-case scenario sort of thing. So that, again, leads to a more conservative estimate. Another option would be to increase the project definition before we select projects. So this would require some level of engineering before we're selecting it. So maybe instead of selecting things that are only at a planning level, 0-2% fleshed out, we get it to a 30% design, and then we select it and fund it. So that obviously has its own downsides, but it does reduce the range of cost increases. Reducing exposure is another option that the board can consider. So this would basically be only committing this board to a fixed dollar amount on a project or only a specific phase of a project. So rather than taking on the entire cost of a project, which can go up over time, we only take on a portion of it, or we set a dollar limit, and beyond that, it's up to the locality to find the rest, and we're not giving more on it. So that's another option. Another thing is improving the time to delivery. So one of the big things that we saw is those projects that have lingered for a long period of time. Those are the ones that seem to balloon the most in cost. So awarding funds contingent on a specific schedule. If PE starts, we right away has to start on schedule. I think there's room to figure out what the wiggle room looks like there. There's difficulties in how to implement that, but that's another option, is basically try to reduce the impacts of inflation, scope creep, all of that by keeping to a narrow schedule for your projects. So I kind of hit on some of these, but there are trade-offs to consider with all of those options. Higher estimates do reduce overruns, but we reduce the number of projects that we can get started in our program. Surplus funding that sits on a project is essentially losing value. So, with inflation, every time the dollar is just sitting there and not being spent on an actual project, it's losing value. Localities have tools like utility franchise agreements, for example, in the city, that aren't easily standardized, and it's not easy to capture that in an estimate if we're standardizing across the board. And so that's something that we may miss out on with the local estimates as opposed to the VDOT estimates. Additional design, like going to a 10% or 30% design, requires non-TPO funding. So it would be up to the project sponsors to find a funding source to get there if we chose that route. Partial funding, obviously, you have to go back out and compete somewhere else, Smart Scale, CBTA, and that can lead to delays. You may have a little bit of the money, but you can't get your project started because you can't put the full package together. And then again, kind of going back to my last point on the last slide, removing funding once a project's under development is difficult. Because if we peel back the project, I don't know many cases where it's happened, but in code, the MPO and the localities can be responsible for paying back anything if the projects don't move forward on schedule. So, there could be negatives there. I think we could work around it, but there are consequences if we do it poorly. So I think there's a lot of considerations in terms of directions of what the TAC could review and look into on how to improve the estimates. I think the other thing to consider, again, as I mentioned, is the median project isn't doing that poorly. Our median project is above budget, above the original estimate, but it's only a little above the estimate, and it's not outside of what's expected for projects that are selected for this. So I think those are the kind of the considerations. I'm happy to answer any questions, go back to any slides, but we just wanted to provide this as the opening for the discussion on a direction to give to the TAC.
Mr. Chair, just as a refresher, if you recall the last time we discussed this with the policy board, the expectation was that there would be information given today in order to provide direction to the TAC to consider next steps.
So in other words, don't get started on all.
So what is the plan?
Can we take a little stretch break? Just, do we mind just taking, just come back to big hand on the five? But I want to just compliment you. This is the best presentation and I've seen, and I like so much about it. We want to have a little bit of a discussion, but remember, we are what Jeff just said. So thank you, Miles. Great presentation, very informative. I look forward to some discussion. But let's take about 6 or 7 minute break and come back.
Okay.
It's not, can you put your slide back up there, just the last slide? If it's easy, yeah. Then go back one.
Go back one, yeah.
All right, we'll see. Yeah, I gotta get out of here too, so.
Okay, yeah, thank you, that's a good, all right, so, welcome back, and again, thank you, I really enjoyed this presentation, there's a lot to digest. And I think that's what the policy board needs to do, is digest this, the plan is, Mr. Parsons pointed out, was always to refer it to the TAC. What do you all think about giving the TAC a couple of months and come back to us, March or April with the form, so if you want to. April. Well, we'll keep tabs on it, but March, maybe April, but we'll refer it to the TAC and tell them we'd like to hear from them in a couple of months, and then staff will work with them and pin down whether that's March or April. There's a lot we could discuss it, but I think there's obviously nothing to decide today. But I did Miles to put that slide back up there, because I think those are the things that, that's a starting point for TAC to look at the things that you've come up with there to suggest. I would ask the policy board if anybody has any other things to add to that bullet point, just to, reach
I
out.
don't have anything necessarily I want to add, but I do have questions for clarification going to TAC. If we're going to give them guidance, I want to make sure I understand the data and what we're moving towards them to say grace over. Okay. So I do have some questions for Miles. Miles, you say active and recently completed. What is recently completed? What was the cutoff date for that?
Sure, so that means construction's been completed, but it hasn't been financially closed out yet, so it's still active in our system and VDOT's system. So usually it's only like 2 years back or so, but it hasn't been closed out, so if there's an older one, it may be in there, so.
Okay, I'm going to give you some of the takeaways, from your presentation that I noted. One of the things is what you've already mentioned was, scope change or the refinement of the scope of the project. Now, that's pretty substantial. If you're going to change the project, let's use, whichever one you want to use, Mail Bridge, or you want to use scope change on Jank Road, Forest Hill, whatever. If you're going to change it, that means more money. So the question I have to you is, when we have these scope changes and increasing in cost, how does the cost get increased for the TPO funding of the project?
Sure, so I guess to the broader point, that's already largely been addressed with the updated guidelines that we have for the program. So the guidelines that were adopted 2 years ago, this board specifically approved scope changes are no longer an eligible reason for a cost increase request. So that is no longer something that you can come back to the TPO if you've evolved it into a different type of project. You can't come back to the TPO and say, we need more money because it's changed in the scope of the project. In terms of the older projects, it's still the same UPC, it's still the same project. And that's kind of, I think, part of the issue. That we've always just tracked it as one project and haven't broken it when the scope changed. And I think that was the intent on adopting those new guidelines 2 years ago, was to remove that possibility, because we have seen several of those, especially in those legacy projects.
Okay, I appreciate you reminding me of that. The median, and I'm glad you used the median because, averaging skews the percentages, is 20% cost overruns, 26%. Now, I'm going to slightly disagree with you. I do believe that's significant. 26% is over one quarter, 25% overruns, okay? Now, what I'm looking for is the etiology of why we're having the overruns, okay? When you back out, and some of them, you backed a smart scale funding and showing that the projects were coming in, within budget. I wouldn't be counting smart scale because anything that's third-party money that's coming in reducing the cost, I don't look at as part of the budget process. If you're looking at air contributions to the cost of the project. So I would take those projects where you said, okay, we got smart scale funding, so therefore it reduced the cost of the project, reduced the funding from the TPO. Okay, so I don't think that's apples to apples, that question. The way the methodology worked in that instance. But I do take exception. I think 26% median, 50% above, 50% below are coming, or 50% are coming in, at 26%. So I think that is worth looking at. And as far as you're reducing impacts of overruns, I didn't see that in the packet. Did I miss something?
No, sir, this was included just for the presentation as some options for the board to discuss.
Okay, I want a copy of your presentation. I've got the rest of it, with the projects, and thank you for doing that. But I would like to, have, any recommendations like that. If you could send that to me and also send it to the county, I would appreciate it because I want my representative on TAC to have all the information when they go into the meeting, okay? So that's going to be helpful.
Yes, sir.
Do you have, in your mind, staff, a recommendation from the different options for reducing the impacts of overruns? Do you have a recommendation that you would like to make of the options that you've listed? What do you think has the most efficacy in terms of being able to accomplish what we want to accomplish?
Isn't that the question for TAC?
Yeah, but I'd like to know, is there a recommendation coming out of staff that's going to TAC?
All right, well, can you answer that question?
Sure, so I think these points hit on different parts of the problem is the intent.
And it was a yes or no question. Are you going to recommend something to TAC?
No, our intent was not to provide a recommendation. It was for this board to pick an option if you wanted to, or otherwise to forward all of these and whatever else the TAC discusses and comes up with.
Okay. Okay.
Dr. Newberg.
Just a point of clarification for me. It seems like in the past, we would, for projects, often ask for funding for a component versus the full project. So it might be the project engineering. So we are not deeming, when we come back with the full project amount, doesn't constitute a cost overrun.
So there's two different versions of that. There's a application for the entire project where we fund just the PE portion. We select the entire cost. So you'd say it's a $5 million project, but we only fund the $1 million for PE up front. And then we change it over time. That we're not viewing as a cost increase. That is, The intent was always there to fund the full project. There are applications that come in that are only asking for the PE phase and only asking for a portion of the total project. And those, even if the cost goes up, regardless of whether the total estimate goes up, if it comes back for us for additional funding, that is an increase because the TPO was committed to a specific dollar amount on that project. They weren't committed to the full project. So that was the way we were looking at these. Because some projects, Hanover County in particular tends to come in for partial projects and they have a set dollar amount that they come to us with. Chesterfield and Ranko do that as well. The city does it as well. But those are partial, whereas a lot of the smaller localities, when they come to us, it's for the full project. So even if we only put PE in, we're intending to fund all three phases.
Yeah, that.
Let's finish this discussion first, Ms. Lasclair. Go ahead, Ms. Dr. Newell.
And then it's before CBTA, for example, any well, put it in that. It used to be that for us, we would have a project and we come back consistently asking for dollars, 2 million 1 year and the next, because it took 10 years to accumulate enough to do a project. So it looks like overruns, but it's not.
So that's the old,
Right.
and I don't know the exact date, Mark can probably provide that, but that's the old way of setting it up. In the last decade or so, the approach has been the project is fully funded and then it moves forward. So now you can't even advance the project until it's fully together. We don't do the piecemealing that we used to do. And so I think that's part of the issue in I guess the way you're perceiving it and the way we're trying to track it on here is
Right. I'm
the
saying,
old way of doing it was piecemeal over time
Right.
until you got the full project, which is why when we looked at Jenk Road or any of those other projects in the city that were the older ones, we tried to find where it was a full estimate and the funding was at the full project estimate level. That was what we were using as the baseline. So we tried to match whatever the full baseline was, as opposed to going back to the earliest year where it may have only been $1 million out of a $10 million project.
okay. But I guess I'm still just not clear. We are. The overruns are really based on overruns or that we did not include at the initiating point, the full amount versus a portion. Which would look like an overrun. And if you're saying that we do include the full amount for a project, then that, and then it's authentic overrun. I guess I'm just trying to make sure.
Let me pull this back up and then I can get us to an example slide that I think will get to the point that you're asking about.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And I
While
can
Miles
hold
is
on
doing
this.
that, I think this is a super illustration of the relationship between the policy board and the TAC. I think the individual TAC members, when they look at this and take this up at their meetings, are going to be able to immediately address the concerns that Dr. Neville and others in the room are having in the confusion and be able to provide the experience and the understanding of the project history so that they can come back with a recommendation and an understanding of what the direction might be going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have some questions for my TAC person, but I think it's good for us to clear up some of these. I mean, the smart scale funding I get that. I think you put the whole universe in there, but that's a valid thing that may adjust the numbers if you think that smart scale.
I want to make sure that I understand what I understand the recommendation, but I want to understand the information that goes with the recommendation or what the ask is from the technical advisory committee.
Right.
Now, if it's an encumbrance or if it's, an impediment, to have this discussion with the policy board, I can meet with you and Miles and we can have that discussion, one-on-one. But I'm gonna tell you, as the representative from Powhatan County, I need to understand how this works. And if I'm voting on projects, I need to know where the project came from. And going back to, what she was just talking about, how the costs are built over time.
So let's
Or are they done? So I don't know.
let's let Mr. Bushing try to land this question for us. So you got Jank Road up there.
Sure. So this is an example in the city. So as you can see, like the early years through 2007, we weren't looking to the full project. Funding was only a portion of this project. And then over time, the estimate increased, so the funding increased. So the baselines we looked at were 2008, where we had funding that matched the estimate. And then we looked also at the 2012, where you had the new kind of baseline for the streetscape project. So those were the two baselines that we considered. It's basically where funding exceeded or matched the total estimate. So when we could paint that picture, that was the easy one. The projects that only have partial funding are a little harder, like, where the TPO is only funding 40% of the project, it's a little harder to identify that. But we tried to find the point where, funding leveled off, and essentially we were saying, this is what the TPO was committing to. And it took going back through some of our old applications and going through the 6-year program, but that was really just matching up applications and dollar amounts.
Does that help?
I may have, maybe. I'm willing to follow up and yes.
Dr. Newell and I might need the summer school class on this.
No, there's a lot, I think there has to be continued discussion.
We could do that together.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll definitely have some, but I think this is a great start. We are agreeing to refer it to the TAC for 2 to 3 months out.
Already.
Not ready to send it to the TAC. All right, well, you have a question, so I'll give you forward.
No, I don't. In order to fix the problem, you have to define the problem. So we've got this tremendous amount of data. Thank you for this. This is very helpful. But we don't know what caused these cost overruns. So some of the suggestions you have were great to me. And probably we would adopt some of those, but I don't know, do they fix these problems? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to quantify that because I don't know what the problem is. Why did they go cost overrun?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to agree with Ms. LaSalette because that was the genesis for the whole
That's the
discussion.
whole purpose of them.
What is the etiology of these cost overruns?
Right. This is not a gotcha. I mean, Gucci's in here too, okay?
No, we're all in it.
You know, I mean, I'm not, you know, this is all in, but exactly, but let's figure out what went wrong or why it is, and then we can craft solutions.
He gave us a list. Some of it was.
We don't have a
because-
single one.
No,
We don't have information on a single one of these.
It's like one person talking, Ms. May.
some of them were because once they did they may have done the engineering and said it's gonna cost this, but when they got into the project, you couldn't just repair, you had to rebuild.
Right, so we
Alright,
could
so
get a
that's one.
spreadsheet, yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, you said there weren't any. The other, you had a bunch listed there. I mean, I recognize that. That was one. Another one was, and I will tell you on Pearman Patterson, it started out at 82 million and it ended up at 14 million. That tells you something. We reduced the scope. So you can
Scope
change the
changes, right.
scope of a project and that would either bring it down or maybe go up because you decided to add sidewalk when we get ready to do it. The one that is the worst, which one was the worst? Anyway, it was 4,000 increase or something. Yeah, there have been some in there, in other words, that. Again, the Mayo Bridge, this is the one where, once they got into it, they realized they couldn't just do the project to repair, it had to be redone. That's my concern is then you do need to you start over. With Pearman Patterson, we started over 3 times. We dumped it, came back and started over. So with a project where that happens, my only consideration would be if it's that much difference, you got to start over process or get rebid and everything.
Rescope.
Yeah, redo it.
You rescope it, and then
That's it.
2 things, rescoping, the timing of the project, Mr. Chair. And there are other issues I think to look at, but they need to be flushed down. I will say that.
I mean, those are
Chairman,
ones that we were-
the Miles has already said that if it's a change in scope, that we stopped doing that 2 years ago.
So, and I will say, if I may, that this project in particular, the Mayo Bridge, this evolved and there was no additional ask of the TPO. So our funding was on it, the project scope changed, but it didn't involve us in terms of funding. So I think this one was a case where the scope changing didn't impact us at the TPO. You know, VDOT and the federal government have covered this project. So and this is kind of a peculiar one, and that's also why it's such a drastic change.
But you need a bridge. That's the other part. But you have, where's your list? Because you said I knew you put it here, but you how to approach it. Because I thought that was pretty. Late.
Sure.
And it was reducing intense revenue. These are the suggestions. You work in certain assumptions, increase project definition.
Well, let's, so before we still have a quorum,
Okay,
even with,
if nobody
Collins
mentions
leaving.
that, you can continue.
well, so there seems to be some, you know, do we refer to TAC now or do we do something else? So the chair will entertain a motion to act on this item, since it seems like there's not consensus to send it to TAC, which is staff's recommendation. let's, the chair will entertain a motion as to what to do next on this item. And let's do this while we have a quorum. Mr. Osborne.
So I move that we do just one more step on this analysis, maybe even like a spreadsheet. And show us the reasons why these were, and some of them were cost overruns or whatever. And then give this entire packet, including the suggestions, to TAC without coming back to us. Just give them the information that you developed with this and let it go straight, let it go to TAC. Just not coming back to us until TAC.
So let me just make sure I understand the motion. The motion is to refer this matter to TAC with the information you produced, to add what exactly?
Add the reasons why these were overruns. That was the whole thing we were looking for in this project. Why were
Okay.
they overruns?
All right,
And you mentioned several of them as you were speaking, but I didn't write any of it down. I mean, you have like a spreadsheet or something.
I don't know whether to wait for a second.
I can second
Okay,
that.
all right, so it's been moved and seconded, so then there'll be some discussion. I want to start with the question, if I don't outcome, I can't. Can you provide the requested additional information?
We have some of it in as much as the applicants give us a rationale when they provide an application. It's not compiled all in one place. We could work with VDOT to try and paint a better picture, a more complete picture of all of these. But we don't have it handy currently.
Mr. Chairman.
Come back to you, Dr. Newman, trying to get in a moment ago, just.
Yeah, I just want the request by Ms. Lascolette, I would ask that it would, in addition to that packet going to TAC, that it would also come to us.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That's-
Absolutely,
yeah.
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The additional request that Ms. Lascolette is making would be best answered by TAC.
That's what I was.
This is where the information comes from. This is where the subject matter experts are for each locality. So in order to understand the cost estimates of each project, I think the discussion needs to be had by TAC,
Mr. Chairman,
not by staff.
I'm gonna disagree with Chet. I know that's going to surprise everybody at this point. But as the elected officials, and I said this beginning the whole conversation some time ago, we're the people responsible for planning and funding transportation in central Virginia. And we're sitting around the table and we have information that's been presented in a presentation by staff. And now the ask is to go out to the side with a spreadsheet under notes, which is done in some cases and what has already been provided, and provide an explanation of the cost overrun using the information that the gentleman has already provided us. I can't see what the problem is in doing that, such that we, the elected officials, can understand what we're sending to the Technical Advisory Committee for refinement.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Hodges.
I'm going to respectfully disagree with Shot Coat. I think the answer to the question, as Mr. Parsons says, involves the locality. I think 74% of the projects are local projects. I think we can answer the question easier for VDOT projects, but the TAC is basically the person, I'm going to go to my TAC representative and ask about what's going on in the town projects. I think, I would prefer to see us refer this, information and ask Ms. Lascolette's question and ask that they come back to us with an explanation of why they are the refund.
Okay. Go ahead.
Good with me. I just want the information. I don't really.
All right, well, we have a motion and a second, so.
Well, I guess I need to withdraw my motion to change the, just refer it to TAC.
So would you like to withdraw your motion?
I do, I think so.
If we're going to do the refinement that my colleague from Ashland is proposing, then I want that as part of, is that part of your motion? Yeah.
That would be my motion, should it be?
Well, let's take care of the motion from the table.
That's what I'm trying to do, okay? Your motion is is refer to TAC, and then TAC come back with the reason, the etiology for the cost overruns, and we get the information then. As opposed to the front end, from this was Colette had recommended. Am I understanding you right, John?
Mr. Chairman.
Well, he hasn't made a motion yet, and I'm not accepting other motions until we deal with this motion.
That's all I need.
Mr. Williams, do you consent to the withdrawal of this last question motion?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no motion on the floor. Mr. Hodges, do you have a motion?
I do, I move that the, presentation that has been prepared and presented, be referred to, the TAC with the request that they respond with their recommendations and address the issues, from their perspective of the cost, the concern that Mr. Ruscolette had, that there be a spreadsheet with a column that provides an explanation for why that is.
Identifying the sources and causes of the cost overruns.
Yes.
Okay. Second,
Mr. Hodges, a motion, let's go back in second, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Any discussion?
I'd still like to, schedule summer school for Dr. Neville.
Any discussion on the motion?
I might have to join on that.
I'm here for some people. Even in the winter.
Yes.
Seeing no discussion, then roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Atkins.
Aye.
Chair Wilkins.
Aye.
Ms. Laskala.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson. Peterson.
He went.
I do.
Mr. Ben, feedback.
But that doesn't. I did not realize it was just.
Well, that's. Mr. Peterson, leaving, we off the corn, we didn't catch that. Now lawyer's not, so I.
We still got you.
he is, it's paid back.
That's a problem.
Now you tell us.
Proceed on consensus.
I think a chair's gonna make a decision, but, yeah, we should just proceed on a consensus, so.
Okay.
It's a bit, it wasn't even gonna be an action item. So I think we have a consensus to proceed. Is anybody opposed to the motion in second? We're not gonna take a vote since we don't have a quorum.
Okay.
Is anybody opposed or? has any other discussion?
I think it's
Okay,
good.
we're gonna proceed with the plan and, I know I have some questions. I might, I'm gonna join you guys at summer school. There's some questions, but this is good. Thank you all so much for hanging in. We're gonna push the regional scenario planning to the future. That's only about the third time we've done that, but we will get to that. CBTA update. Mr. Parson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 23 is a quick review of the CBTA meeting on December 8th, the Technical Advisory Committee on December 12th, and a projection of upcoming meetings for the CBTA over the course of the January session. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I think the information there.
Okay, well, I certainly want to, anybody have any questions, please bring them forward. Seeing none, we're GRTC. Thank you for hanging in.
Absolutely, no problem. Mr. Chair, I'm gonna defer to Ms. Torres to provide a brief update on the BRT study for you all. Thank you.
Yes, so our north-south BRT study kicked off in November. And just wanted to give a heads up that we are entering kind of the engagement stage. There will be 3 stakeholder engagement meetings. Look out, several of you should receive today an invite for the one in January. The other one is in March and June. That will be a pretty robust effort. The Western BRT study is also on its way, and we'll be doing a stakeholder engagement for that as well. That was also scheduled for that month. Kind of a smaller group, and also look for beginning engagement for our micro transit study with the 5 pilot jurisdictions. We want to kind of re-engage in that effort before the contract with the phase 2 kicks off.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. Any questions, GRTC? Thank you. Great update. So I don't think RMTA is here. Are there any updates from you on that front?
He's here.
Mr. Bensky, thank you for staying with us.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
So I have a brief update that I've already provided to Janice for distribution, but just as a reminder, we are accepting applications for our fiscal year 2024 grant programs. So there's a little bit of information that includes any of our rail, transit, and commuter assistance programs. There are contacts that I provided for each of the different types of programs, but you can always feel free to reach out to me. Applications are due February 1st, so it gives you roughly less than a month if you're considering applying for any of those. Relevance for MPOs and localities, we tend to see a lot of interest in some of our special programs that includes technical assistance that tends to fund a lot of our feasibility studies, kind of transit long range planning. We also have demonstration funds that help start with either testing new concepts for new transit service or technology. And then, of course, our workforce development, which is the rebranding of our intern program. And that is something that's also eligible for any type of field within the public transportation realm. So any interest in it, we always encourage all of our partners and eligible grantees to apply. Besides that, next Monday, our communication team is hosting a workshop. Over the last couple of years, we've gone through a major rebrand and tried to expand a lot of our efforts in terms of marketing related to public transportation. So they are hosting a virtual workshop on Monday, January 9th from 1 to 2. And it'll discuss all the marketing initiatives. So every time I come before you talk about transit or bike week or commute VA efforts, that's all supported by our communications. We also do provide technical assistance to any of our partners. So if there's a branding package or any kind of marketing materials, we are available also to provide assistance on that. So if you're interested in sitting in on that, I provide the registration link in my agency update, and that's all I have.
Thank you. I think sometime maybe we should have you present earlier because you often are offering lots of opportunities that I don't think we're fully aware of. So I think we might have you present earlier in the meeting about all the things that your agency is doing, because I always hear it's a lot, but it's always at the tail end of the meeting. When we're, yeah.
No respect.
Definitely, I would love to have you present like we had from the Rail Authority earlier. And Mr. Riblet, Mr. Cotton has no idea how much fun he missed.
Absolutely. Similar to DRPG, our report is also available for distribution and the spirit of saving some time. I'll just highlight a couple of things real quickly. The CTB meeting this month is currently scheduled for January 17th and 18th at the VDOT Auditorium downtown. Noteworthy for that meeting is that we are expecting a project scorecards and the staff recommended funding scenario for smart scale will be made available to the CTB and the public at that time. It is important for us to thank all the effort from localities and their staffs in the smart scale process over the last several months. It's been a significant effort by all, and we wanted to say thank you publicly to all the locality staff that worked with us in that process. The only other thing to highlight real quickly is that the design build one package for the northern segment of the Fall Line Trail hooking up to the trolley line did go out for advertisement in December. So we'll keep you posted on the status of how it goes.
Good. Any questions from? Our future meeting topics are shown, and we talked about maybe potential another one from DRPT. Any member comments? All right. Mr. Birch, thank you so much. And I'm sorry, your name again?
Colin.
Colin Birch. Thank you both so much. Perfect timing. We're adjourned until next time. Everybody have a great January. Thank you all.